Right, greetings, hello, welcome back to the Philosophy Club here in the middle of France. Sunday evening, and we're going to do something slightly different today. We're going to be looking at the Tarot of the Gods, which of course I've presented before in these meetings. We have a 2-volume, reference work and the cards. And then we're going to try and locate them on the periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions, which I've talked about before. We're going to see what I tried to do when creating the Tarot of the Gods was to be very generous from different world regions and religions. So there should be at least one from each of the major faith groupings of history. The Tarot of the Gods is an interfaith tool for understanding. Objectively, so it could be used in philosophy classes, religious studies classes, anywhere in the world, and you'll learn about the whole world's traditions. Right now in the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, which I believe opens tomorrow, it could be there helping facilitate dialogue and stuff. So that's and the periodic table is another tool that I created for this interfaith dialogue. So let's see if they marry up. There's a few anomalies, like we have in some of the humanist boxes, we have, maybe there's atheism, maybe doesn't have a God card, but we might discuss that as we go along. Right, okay, well look, Noah, go for the first one. Choose a God card. And we'll see what the fates give us today.
All right, today is the god fire Horus.
Horus, the 9 of Fire. Yes, it's a great card. This. So, do you want to describe the card?
All right, a man. With a bird face. A tall hat, is that how you say it in English?
Yeah.
The sun at his back, as well as the pyramid. And he holds some kind of key. And on the other hand, how do you call it actually?
Like a rod.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, the 9 of Fire, right, so he stands for an overactive mind, anxiety, so like you're awake all night, your mind's racing, you can't turn it off. He was one of the most important of all the ancient Egyptian deities, and he's the god of kingship and the sky. We know he was worshipped from at least the late prehistoric Egypt period, up until the Ptolemaic kingdom, which was the Macedonian Greeks, Cleopatra and stuff, and even into Roman Egypt. So Horus was there all along. In terms of the periodic table, if you look on the table, he's box number 4, ancient Egyptian, of which I've estimated there are about 100,000 devotees now in the world. That's a generous figure, but I've included in that all the Egyptologists that study ancient Egypt. There are loads here in France, there are academics, and there have been, ever since Napoleon went to Egypt and brought back things that enabled Champollion, the great French linguist, to translate the hieroglyphs. So it's been a big industry in French culture, Egyptology, and also in Britain. People like Wallis Budge and many other great scholars translated Egyptian stuff. So I've included all the academics, also in Germany there's lots of Egyptologists. If you include all them, plus all their students, plus all the writers that write books about Egypt, which is millions, and people that belong to one of the various sort of new revised Egyptian movements. There is, for instance, a thing called the Fellowship of Isis, which I actually belong to, set up by an interesting couple in Ireland. I went to visit them in their castle in Ireland, Clonegall, back in the 1980s, and met them, and they said, oh, you ought to be a priest of Isis. So I said, okay. It's called the Fellowship of Isis. And Horus and Isis are relatives. So although the Fellowship of Isis doesn't worship Horus, nevertheless they're part of the same family. And the last time I looked, there are about 10,000 members of the Fellowship of Isis scattered around the world. It's impossible to quantify, really. But so I reckon 100,000. And then in the whole of history, if you think about it, probably about 1 billion since the beginning of Egyptian civilization, because there were like 5,000 years, 4,000 years of continuous Egyptian civilization. All those generations, in some way, worshipped Horus. So why? Okay, he is central to the plot line of Isis and Osiris. And if you don't know the story, we fortunately have it in pyramid texts, and we also have a version in Plutarch, which is, he was an Egyptian expert among priests in Greece. He was priest at Delphi, and he was in charge of the Delphic Games for a while, old Plutarch, and he went to study in Alexandria. He lived a couple of centuries after Christ, but he was a pagan philosopher, and he wrote down the stories of Isis and Horus, and we've got that come down in writing. It wasn't destroyed when the Alexandria Library was burned. Sources survived. So the story, according to Plutarch, which is pretty substantiated from other sources, is that Osiris was the just ruler of Egypt, a really righteous king, and his consort Isis, who was his beloved. Egyptian sources muddle the concept of wife with that of sister. It means someone very, very dearly beloved to you, a wife. And they were happily living away. Osiris was invited to go abroad to teach civilization and peace, and he went to India, a special invitation, and he brought agriculture, writing, civilization, marriage, all the sorts of arts. But in his absence, a dark god called Seth conspired because he wanted to oust Osiris. And so when Osiris came back from India, Seth organised a banquet, a party. Celebrate your return, oh dear great Osiris, right? But it was all fake. And during the banquet, Seth revealed this magical coffin he'd had made, inlaid, very expensive wood, all that stuff. Said, Osiris, I made you this wonderful thing when you're away. I mean, you'll need it one day, of course. I thought I'd get it done. I'm not sure if it fits. Would you just lie down in it and see if it fits? And Osiris was so innocent and naive. He just, okay, lay down in it. Whereupon Seth slammed the lid shut and locked it immediately with that triple lock, and told his henchmen to come in and cart the thing out and throw it into the Nile, where it would sink, and that's the end of Osiris. And the other courtiers didn't know what to do, because Seth was a powerful, like a thug, with a sort of Putin character, with a following of extra thugs. So anyway, that's the beginning of the tragedy, and Isis was really distraught, pulling her hair out, but didn't have the strength to do anything about it. The coffin sailed down the Nile, and it floated across the Mediterranean Sea to Byblos, which is where our word Bible comes from, the great Phoenician town dedicated to learning and the gods. And in fact, it's interesting that it was the centre for the papyrus trade coming from Egypt. In Byblos, they made the books. And that's why the word Bible became the word for a book. Bibliothèque in French is a library because of Byblos. So it floated there and got tangled up in the roots of a tree, this coffin with Osiris in. And Isis was so distraught, she used her magic powers, because she's the goddess of magic and healing, to find where it had gone. And she got a boat and sailed after it. She arrived in Phoenicia to Byblos and found the coffin, persuaded the king and queen of the area to let it go and come back to Egypt. And she was happy because she brought her husband back. he was dead, unfortunately, but she managed to revive him through her magic spells. This is very much like the resurrection of Christ story. The dead Christ has been in the underworld, the dead Osiris. And then he comes back to life through the magical powers of Isis. Okay, and they conceive a son during that time. They conceive a child who is Horus. So Horus represents the miracle child that, I mean, the father's gone through a lot. He's been killed, he went to India, now he's come back. It's like the son of his promise, you know. And Isis had to resurrect her dead husband to have this child. So a lot of the hopes of the world are pinning on this child. Then what happens, I mean, the story isn't over. Seth hears about this and is really cross and comes and attacks them. They're hiding out in the Delta area somewhere. And this time he kills Osiris again, you know, because he's got his thugs and army and stuff. And this time he chops up Osiris into 13 pieces. He cuts him up and scatters them throughout Egypt. He says, you'll never be able to resurrect him now. I've defeated you. I've chopped up your great Osiris. That's it, end of. However, he doesn't realize how powerful a magician Isis is. And the story is that, and this, by the way, this story is the basis of all ancient Egyptian religion and spirituality. There were festivals to commemorate each of these big events at different times of the year, and different big temples to Osiris and Isis. And Horus would put on pageants and stuff. And all the priests and priestesses would enact these events. Isis miraculously goes throughout Egypt and finds all the 13 pieces over a period of time and puts them all together again. And he's once more resurrected, Osiris. And this time all the other gods turn up and help because they see there's been a great injustice being done. Because Seth is coming and going to attack them again. They say, no, enough is enough. And they tell Seth to go away, and he's sent off in shame as like, that's enough of that. And they ask Osiris, what do you want? Now you're back in life, do you want to be king of Egypt again? Or something else? And Osiris says, thank you very much. I think I've done enough being king of Egypt, and it's quite a dangerous job. I'd rather be king of the afterlife. The afterlife. So that when people die, they come into my kingdom. And the gods say, okay, fine, that you can have that job forever, eternity. So the faithful Egyptians believed that Osiris is the lord of the afterlife. So when you die, you go to him for judgment, along with some other gods that help. Horus became the token of hope for this world, and he became the totem of the good pharaoh, the righteous pharaoh, because they know the story. Osiris can't help us, but Horus can come and dwell among us as the spirit of justice and truth and all that. And the pharaohs would wear a particular hat, which is here, which is the Horus hat. And the eye of Horus, which is shown here on the card as well, was on their amulets and on their pyramids to show the all-seeing eye of Horus. It's even on the American dollar bill, this all-seeing eye on the top of the pyramid. Why? Because Horus became very popular among Freemasons in the 18th century. 19th century, there were lodges of Isis in Egypt, brought to France, and they're still active today. And there are Freemasonic lodges dedicated to Horus in America, France, Britain, and elsewhere, which are also a sort of continuation of ancient Egyptian Hermetic wisdom. Another thing that Horus comes into, and this is where it gets interesting, is in box number 107, there's a thing called Thelema, which is the tradition associated with a Freemason, a magician called Aleister Crowley, who was British, lived in the latter part of the 19th century, first bit of the 20th century. He joined a thing called the Order of the Golden Dawn, which was run out of Paris, along with lots of esoteric thinkers like Yeats, the poet, and they did these grades, bit sort of Masonic type things, and he married an Irish artist's daughter in Paris called Rose Kelly, and they went for a honeymoon to Egypt in 1904, and she received, through channeling, some texts written by an ancient Egyptian priest who was in the room but invisible. Now, you either believe this or you think they were crazy, but the Thelemites, of which there's about 25,000, believe it was true, and that this text is called the Book of the Law, and it purports to be all about Horus and justice. And Crowley's Thelema religion predicts we're going to come into the age of Horus. We were in the age of Osiris, which was patriarchy for thousands of years. Then we had the age of Isis, which was sort of Christianity, and everyone loves the feminine, and we're all into mother goddesses again. But now there's going to come the age of Horus, which is the age of when we grow up, we no longer are mummy's boy or daddy's boy. We become mature adults in our own right and can have an adult conversation about spirituality. Anyway, that was Crowley's idea, which he received, channeled from, quote unquote, an ancient Egyptian disembodied spirit of a priest. And it's very influential behind the scenes, like a little glimpse. A man called Jack Parsons, who invented the American rocket program, invented the fuel that these space rockets run on, liquid hydrogen. He was a follower of the Thelemite current, as it's called. Most people don't know that, but the whole of NASA and the American moon space program, Apollo and all that, came out of this guy who followed the Thelema tradition. So there we are. So I think we have to put Horus in that box as well. And as I said, in some of the Freemasonic boxes, 116, 117 and 118, he'd probably also appear in there. Okay, so there's our first one. Right, I think we've done justice to old Horus.
Yeah.
May he continue to support the good. That's all I can say. Right, let's have our next God card.
Nine of water, but I can't read.
Manannan MacLear, we pronounce that.
Manannan MacLear.
Yes. The nine of water. Well, that's quite good. We had the nine of fire, now we go to the nine of water. Yes, okay, thank you. So, this is a Druid god from ancient Celtic times. Okay. And he's the god of the sea, god of the oceans. Manannan MacLear means son of the sea. Lear means the sea. He's basically the king of the oceans. So he's the Celtic equivalent to Poseidon in the Greek, or Neptune in the Roman. And obviously the Celts were quite a seafaring people. Their lands were connected by the sea, so they were travelling a lot by boat from Brittany to Ireland, to Wales, up to Scotland, to the Isles of Scilly. And I have a book by a famous archaeologist talking about the sea peoples of the Atlantic coast, all the way from Portugal and Spain up to Orkney. That is the heartland of the ancient Celts, seafaring peoples. Manannan was, a powerful and inspirational god who was invoked by sailors, seafarers. He has he has very many magical powers. He actually lives in an invisible land across the sea on some magical islands that cannot be seen by normal sailors. They're cloaked with an invisibility thing. And there are many legends about him. The one I find most interesting, which is illustrated in the card, is that he once arrived at Tara in Ireland, which was the Druid centre where the king, the sort of the just king of the day, was hanging out and having his hall, and at Tara that meant there were lots of bards playing harps and poets doing songs, and they were feasting and all that. Cormac mac Airt was the name of the king, and he is a historical figure just at the cusp when Ireland was stopping to be a pagan culture and becoming Christian. But he was still pagan, but Christians were about. He figures in a lot of the old legends of Ireland that were written down by later scholars in the medieval time, but they were passed on orally, right? So, anyway, this stranger bursts into the hall of Cormac mac Airt and says, "Hello, I've come to visit." And he's wearing very fine robes and has a big staff, great headgear. And Cormac mac Airt, not wanting to be like rude, says, "Well, okay, stranger, you're welcome. Where are you from?" "I'm from over the seas. I've come a long way." "Well, come and sit down. Have a nice mead here. Give him a cup of mead." And they become friendly, chatting, and there's some singers and dancers, and the evening wears on beautifully. And Cormac seems highly intelligent. This stranger seems to Cormac highly intelligent. He knows a lot about the world. He's obviously travelled a lot. And so he says, they become good friends. He says, "Is there anything, what would you like? I'll give you anything from my kingdom. You're really obviously a cultured person." And the stranger says, because he's been fancying the wife of Cormac all evening, who's sitting up there. And he says, "Well, actually, would you mind if I slept with your wife? She is so pretty after all." And at this, the king, Cormac, he can't believe the rudeness of it. The evening changes its tone, and Cormac says, "Guards, guards!" And the stranger runs out of the hall at fast, top speed, because he knows he's offended the honour of the king and his wife. So Cormac chases out after this miscreant who now has betrayed his friendship. And his guards come and follow him. They chase him all the way down to the beach and discover that this stranger had a boat waiting on the beach, which isn't that far away, and they're all, fast runners. Gets in, so the king, Cormac, whistles up some of his little navy, and they set off after the ship. And for 2 days they pursue it on the waves, going up and down, fierce waves, but they've got proper navy people. Eventually they reach this island, which they didn't even know existed. Magical island, it seems. They land, the stranger's boat is already beached there, and there's birds singing all kinds of exotic tunes, there's flowers with strange scents, and there's trees with fruits they've never seen before, and there seems to be a kind of music in the air. And they go up into the great hall, and the king, Cormac, goes in, and there at the end on the dais is the stranger who had offended him. He's hunted him to his lair, but it's like a huge palace, and there are guards everywhere. So anyway, from the throne, the guy says, "Welcome, Cormac mac Airt. I am Manannan Maclear. I am the god of the sea. You are welcome to our magical home." Cormac is very, overcome. He doesn't know what to say, right? And he says, "Yeah, but hang on, you own all the sea, you're the god of the sea. Why did you have to, flirt with my wife like that and make me annoyed?" "Ah, I knew it was the only way to get you out of Tara and come visit me here." So, okay. They make up. And they have a banquet and a feast, and as a present, when he leaves a few days later, Cormac is given a chalice, which is a beautiful embroidered cup with jewels. And this present for Cormac mac Airt to take back with him is a magical cup, because whenever anyone lies in its presence, it shatters. And whenever anyone tells the truth, it comes back together again. Now this tool, Manana MacLear gives to Cormac, saying, this will make you the wisest king because you'll be able to tell which of your assistants, counsellors, is telling the truth or not. And you can sack those that are lying. So this was an amazing gift, which Cormac then brought back to Tara. And legend says that he kept it, he had a great reign, and he was the wisest and most just king of Ireland ever. Now I've written a screenplay of a film where the cup is rediscovered in a council estate in somebody's garden in modern Dublin. And, and then there are adventures like, can we get the cup to Parliament? And, I think that if we could get Cormac's cup back, it would clean up politics. Because with politicians, it would lie. They would lie and it would break every time. Anyway, that's the idea for a screenplay I've got. But I think it's a Druid teaching story. Did it actually happen? Well, why not? In the ancient mists of time, something like that might have happened. But it tells a moral truth, I think, that of the importance of telling truth, and that was the single most important virtue for the Druid elders of Europe and the Celtic tradition, because everything hinges on truth. If people lie, nothing is possible. Whatever their profession, there has to be, the farmer has to be honest about whether he planted the fields and with what crops, or the mechanic has to be about, fixing what device or whatever. And the leaders of the assembly have to tell the truth. And if you didn't tell the truth, you lost face in ancient Ireland and Britain and Gaul. So it's a really important story. Now, where is that on the periodic table? Okay, it is box number 29. It's in the primal religions, okay, which is another way of talking about the pagan religions of prehistory. I reckon there's about 20,000 probably trained Druids in today's world. There are various teaching orders with thousands of people who graduate, and we have a council of British Druid orders, which I'm the peace officer for. So, there aren't that many. 20,000 in total over the last 50 years have probably gone through some kind of training and belong to some kind of order. Or they might just be like hedge druids, just solitaries. And then I reckon if you think up all the people of the Celtic tribes throughout the whole of history, because in those days it stretched from the Danube River up to Austria, Switzerland, they were all Celtic lands, and the Rhine Valley was Celtic. So I reckon possibly 100 million, in total of the number of Celts, if you think of all the people of Ireland and Britain, over like 10,000 years. It's a demographic, estimate. Obviously, it's not exact, but it was a lot. So that's Manana MacLear was one of their most important gods, I think, god of the sea. And there's some evidence that the Druids, the Celts, made it to North America. A man called Barry Fell some years ago wrote a book called America BC. They found there's a place called Mystery Hill in New England, which seems to be a Celtic temple, sacred site. And they found some Ogham script there on stones, which was the Druid writing system. And it's not impossible that the Celts could have gone from Ireland. We know they got up to Iceland and across to North America. It's not that far. So anyway, it's an interesting tradition, obviously, and the emphasis on truth is vital as a way to get peace. The purpose of the Druids was to maintain peace between the tribes, but you can't do that if people lie. I've realised that as a mediator. You can't mediate between two groups if one of them is lying. And that's the tragedy we've got at the moment in the Ukraine and Russia war. One side, Russia, is lying and doing huge disinformation campaigns, propaganda campaigns, saying black is white. And if you don't believe me, read the important book, The Road to Unfreedom by Professor Timothy Snyder, who lays it all out. These lies didn't happen overnight, they've been going on for decades. So you can't mediate with people that do the lying thing. There has to be a reformation before you can mediate. That's the Druid way. And it's it's unfortunate, but fact. Right, okay, let's move on. We've got Manana MacLear. Let's do another one. See which god we're going to get next.
Oh, the rainbow snake. We already did that one.
Try the one on the bottom, just for fun.
All right. Aha! Jesus Christ.
There's I don't think we've had him before.
I don't think so. Yes.
Okay, the Ten of Water. So this card's interesting. Do you want to describe what do you see there?
4 people sitting around a table with a meal, glasses of, I think, wine. And it seems to be Jesus in the middle. And at the back, some windows staring over mountains.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. It's made by my lovely artist, Sarah Nadaf, when she was visiting me here. And it's what I call the after party of the Last Supper. So there's the Last Supper, we all know, Leonardo da Vinci did with all 12 disciples and Jesus. This is the after party in the dawn. Who stayed up all night learning the Gnostic truths of Christianity? And here we have Mary Magdalene, Thomas, and St. John. It was the small inner group of Gnostic disciples. That's the conceit behind the card, and it may well have happened, actually, because we know from the Gnostic teachings that have come down, the texts that have been translated, Jesus was going into much more detail of discussion and metaphysics and psychology and so on. In texts like the Pistis Sophia and the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, there's a lot more philosophical discussion. They were having like a philosophy club, effectively. And they were able to ask anything. And in the Pistis Sophia, there's incredible texts of Mary Magdalene saying, what is truth, what is life, what happens when we die, where do we go? And one question she asks that's really interesting, actually, is, and I'm sure many of us have wondered about this, okay, let's say somebody's really wise, they've been a Freemason, they've gone through lots of initiations, they're a priest of Isis, but then they do something stupid, they sin, they do something like become a paedophile, something horrible, right? And they fall ethically. When they die, how will they be judged? Compared to, let's say, a farmer just lives out in the fields doing his crops, never been to any esoteric teachings, never studied mysticism or philosophy, just occasionally goes to church, just like normal French farmer, doesn't think too deeply about it all, but loves nature and does his job. Which of those two, when they die, will be more severely punished? Will it be the one who's done the initiations and got the teachings, or the one who hasn't? It's an interesting question to wonder about. What Jesus says in reply is, it will be much worse for the one that did all the initiations and made the priestly ranks and became a high-powered Freemason and so on, who then sins, because they ought to have known better than the simple farmer who just gets on doing their thing and doesn't know anything about it. For them, there'll be a much happier after death. And you can think of the Seth story that I told earlier. I mean, Seth was a god. He should have known better than chopping up his, brother Osiris. So that's in the Pistis Sophia, that exchange.